Hi everyone, welcome back. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. My name is Raymond. When my girlfriend insisted I meet her parents over dinner, she said it was important to her. When someone you care about asks you to do something like that, you just do it. So I showed up, thinking it would be a simple dinner, polite conversation, maybe some awkward small talk. But at that dinner, my girlfriend laughed and trashed me right in front of her parents, in Spanish. She thought I wouldn't understand a word she was saying. But what she didn't know was that I understood everything. And by the end of that dinner, I gave her a surprise she never expected. Looking back to when I met my girlfriend, I had just gotten a job at a mid-sized pharmaceutical company. I was in an entry-level position, mostly dealing with internal documentation, shipping logs, and basic reporting. Still, it paid all right, and more importantly, there was room to grow. It was during one of those routine office days, buried in paperwork, that I met Valeria. She worked for a logistics company that partnered with ours. They handled internal package transfers between branches. That afternoon, she came in with a small padded envelope meant for my supervisor. He was out at the time, and I was the one stuck covering his deliveries. I didn't think much of it at first, just another delivery person dropping off something. Valeria walked in with this professional, straight-to-business energy. She looked like she didn't waste time with small talk. And for some reason, that made me want to get her to laugh. I don't know why. So I made a dumb joke about how we were the most exciting stop on her route and how she should savor the experience. It wasn't a great joke, but she smiled. Over the next few weeks, every time Valeria had a delivery for our floor, she didn't just drop it and leave. She started lingering, asking questions, first about work, then about me. At some point, she stopped pretending it was just about the packages. She had this warm, earthy charm about her. And it didn't take long before I realized I wanted to be part of whatever that was. I was single, not caught up in any messy situations, and for the first time in a while, someone genuinely interesting was right in front of me. She seems to see something in me, too. So I decided not to overthink it. One afternoon, she stopped by my office like she does when she's around. As she was about to leave, I asked her casually, "So what's the plan for tonight?" I expected her to say she was going out with friends or something light. But instead, she smiled and said, "Sleep. Just sleep." We both laughed. It was such a funny response, and it broke any tension that might have been there. That's when I figured, this is my window. I told her, "I've got a better plan. There's this new place my friend told me about. Good food, quiet vibe. I think you'd like it." For a moment, she didn't say anything. She just looked at me, like she was sizing me up, deciding if I was serious. Then she gave a little nod, said, "All right," and that was it. I took her number, and by that evening, we were sitting across from each other at that restaurant. The place actually lived up to the hype. It was trendy, but not noisy, had that warm lighting. We talked for hours, from music to food to random little things that somehow felt important. That night ended in the best way possible. After that, we kept in touch, chatting and calling. I found myself looking forward to hearing from her. It didn't take long before I realized I was falling. A few more dates in, I stopped dancing around it. I looked her in the eye one day and asked her straight up, "Would you be my girlfriend?" And she smiled and said yes. I remember walking out of that cafe afterward like I had just hit the jackpot. And in that moment, I truly believed I had. For the first 3 years, things between Valeria and me were good. It wasn't some whirlwind fairy tale, but we seemed to understand each other. In those 3 years, we went on weekend trips, binge-watched dumb shows, and had long late-night talks about everything and nothing. She got along with my friends, and I got used to her habits, even the weird ones. We had arguments here and there, but they never felt like the kind that would break us. But after her younger sister got married, I noticed a subtle shift, but I could feel it. Valeria started bringing up marriage, casually at first. A joke here, when it's our turn there. But over time, it got more pointed. She began talking more about her parents' expectations, about how, in her culture, it wasn't just about what we wanted, it was about what her family expected. And they expected her to settle down. Soon, I understood where she was coming from. I respected it. Her family was close-knit and traditional, and I knew that pressure wasn't easy to carry. But I also knew I wasn't ready to propose yet. Not because I didn't want to, I did, and I loved her. But I had made myself a promise. I wouldn't go into marriage scrambling financially. I had a promotion coming up that I'd worked hard for, and with that would come the kind of salary that could actually support the kind of wedding Valeria had always dreamed about. So I asked her to be patient. I told her the promotion was close, and that I just needed a little more time. But something about that conversation broke the rhythm we had. She said she understood, but after that, she started pulling away. She'd take hours to return my calls. Sometimes she didn't reply to texts at all. She started acting like everything between us was on autopilot, like she wasn't really in it anymore. There was this coldness in how she spoke to me, like she'd already started emotionally checking out. I tried to talk to her about it, but she brushed it off. So, a few days before the weekend, Valeria sent me a message. It read, "Hey, are you free this weekend? My parents want to meet you." I stared at my phone for a second. I hadn't expected that. I mean, yeah, we were serious, but meeting the parents? That's a big step. And, to be honest, I didn't feel ready for it. My first instinct was to tell her no. And I did. I even started typing some excuse, but before I could send it, she texted again. Really? What could possibly be more important than meeting my parents? That stopped me cold. I didn't have a good answer. I wasn't actually busy. I just felt nervous. Meeting someone's parents is tricky. You don't know what they expect, and if they don't like you, it changes everything. I tried calling her, hoping to explain it better over the phone, but she was firm. Look, if we're serious about each other, this shouldn't be up for debate. She had a point. I didn't want to fight. We'd already had a couple of small arguments lately, and I wasn't trying to start another one over this. So I caved and said yes. The change in her tone was instant. Great. They're going to love you, she said, like she had no doubt. That made me feel a little better, but still, I knew I had to bring my A game. First impressions matter, especially with parents. So, I started preparing. I went out and bought a really nice bottle of wine. I picked out dark jeans, a blazer, and polished shoes. I even Googled basic dinner etiquette, just in case. By the time Saturday came, I was dressed like I was going to a job interview. And, in a way, I kind of was. I was showing up to prove that I was good enough for their daughter. I drove over to their house with a wine bottle on the passenger seat. I remember sitting in the car for just a moment after parking, taking a deep breath, and telling myself, okay, just be yourself. Be respectful. You've got this. Then I stepped out, walked up to their front door, rang the bell, and waited. Dinner at Valeria's parents' house started off pretty smoothly, honestly. They were warm when they opened the door, smiling like they'd been looking forward to meeting me. Her dad even gave me a firm handshake. We made our way into the living room, and while Valeria and her mom went off to the kitchen to finish up, her dad offered me a seat and a drink. We got into a light conversation. He nodded a lot and asked good questions. I thought to myself, okay, this might go better than I expected. When Valeria's mom called from the kitchen that dinner was ready, we got up and moved to the dining room. Everything looked good. I even said a small thank you in my head, because I was genuinely grateful to be there. At first, dinner went fine. Her dad kept the conversation going, still curious about my job. I could tell he was testing the waters, trying to figure me out. I answered everything calmly, trying not to overthink it. But then something shifted. Her mom said something in Spanish, and all of a sudden, the whole family burst out laughing. Everyone except me. Now I speak Spanish. I understand it well, but I didn't let that show. I just kept eating and looking down at my plate like I didn't catch a word. What she said, though, it cut. She basically said that my entry-level job wouldn't be enough to properly take care of anyone, let alone their daughter. And that laugh wasn't friendly. Her husband, still speaking in Spanish, added that of all the men Valeria had ever brought home, I looked like I had the least ambition. That part stung more than I expected. Then Valeria chimed in too. She said she was just managing me. She told them she only brought me there so they could meet me before she eventually found someone better. I'll never forget that. My face was calm, but my stomach twisted. I had never felt so small in a room that pretended to be warm. At one point, her mom even looked straight at me and asked, still in Spanish, if they were sure I didn't understand what they were saying. Valeria laughed and said I was too stupid to even know what we were talking about. And then, as if nothing had happened, her mom switched to English and asked me with a smile, "Are you enjoying the food, Raymond?" I looked up at her, smiled right back, and said, "Yes, ma'am. It's really delicious. Thank you." And you know what? I wasn't lying. The food was good. It's just everything else at that table that left a bad taste in my mouth. As the evening wound down and dessert plates were being cleared, I stood up, looked around the table, and calmly thanked Valeria's parents for their hospitality, in Spanish. I spoke clearly, deliberately, just loud enough for everyone to hear. The moment the words left my mouth, the room froze. Her father, who had been all smiles and smug looks all evening, stiffened in his chair. Her mother blinked like she was trying to make sense of what she'd just heard. And Valeria looked like the blood drained straight out of her face. That grin she'd been wearing all night vanished. I told them, still in Spanish, that I understood everything that had been said throughout the night. Every insult, every joke, every condescending comment that they thought flew over my head. And then, still calmly, I picked up my coat, nodded politely, and walked out the front door to my car. I had never once mentioned in the 3 years Valeria and I were together that I had studied Spanish in high school for 4 years. I wasn't fluent, no, not even close, but I understood it well enough. I couldn't carry on a full conversation smoothly, but I knew the words. I recognized the tone. I knew enough to sit there through an entire dinner and hear myself being mocked to my face without flinching. And funny enough, I had actually spent the last week practicing one sentence, just one, "Thank you for having me," because I wanted to make a good impression. By the time I got home, my phone had lit up with at least 10 missed calls from her. A few texts too, the usual mix of panic and guilt. She kept asking why I never told her I could understand Spanish, like that was the real betrayal. Not the way she laughed at me. Not the way she let her parents tear me down for sport. I stared at the screen for a long minute, then turned the phone face down on the counter. I didn't block her. I didn't even respond. I just let the silence speak for me. Because after hearing what I heard at that table, I didn't feel like I owed her a single word more. The next day was Sunday morning, and I was just lying on the couch, half watching some random documentary playing in the background. I hadn't touched my phone all morning. I didn't want to. I'd been quiet since that dinner. No calls, no texts, no explanations. I figured silence would say more than I ever could. That was the plan, anyway. But then I heard the knock. I already had a feeling who it was before I even got up. Sure enough, I opened the door, and there she was, Valeria. She looked pissed, tired, and confused all at once. The first thing out of her mouth was, "Why are you ignoring me?" It was a straight confrontation. I didn't flinch. I told her flat out, "I don't owe you anything." And I meant that. Whatever we had, whatever I thought we were building together, that ended that night. She tried to brush it off, like it was all just a harmless joke. Said I was taking it too seriously. That she didn't mean any of it. But that's the thing. Whether she meant it or not didn't matter. Some things you don't say about someone you claim to care about. Some things you just don't do. And the way she laughed that night? That wasn't someone making an innocent joke. That was someone comfortable disrespecting me. When she stepped forward and tried to come inside, I didn't even hesitate. I stopped her. I told her clearly, "You're not welcome here." Her face dropped. She didn't expect that. Maybe she thought I'd argue or give in. Instead, I just shut the door. I locked it. That silence didn't last long. She started texting, calling, voice notes. At first, it was the usual, "You're overreacting. Can we talk?" Then it turned sour. The guilt trips. The insults. Name-calling. Blaming me for being too sensitive or too cold. I watched it all pile up on my screen until it was just noise. That's when I blocked her phone, social media, everything. I did it to breathe. I did it because I finally saw her clearly, and I realized I deserved peace. So, I gave it to myself. Walking away from that relationship wasn't easy. I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt. There were good moments when I truly believed we had something strong. But after that dinner, After seeing who she really was when she thought I wasn't watching or listening, I couldn't pretend anymore. Respect is a line you don't cross. And once it's gone, it doesn't come back. So I ended things. The days that followed were heavy. There were moments I'd catch myself wondering if I missed a sign, if there was something I could have done differently. But the truth is, sometimes people wear masks, so well that even when you're looking straight at them, you don't see the cracks until it's too late. I had to accept that, not blame myself, and just move forward. So that's what I started doing. I turned inward with intention. I began focusing on myself, my goals, my career, my health, the little things I had neglected. I poured energy into my work, picked up books I'd been meaning to read, and reconnected with a few old friends. I wasn't out there looking to fill the space she left. I wanted to understand it, sit with it, and grow from it. I won't say I'm all better. Healing doesn't happen overnight. But I'm getting there. And what keeps me going is knowing that I didn't let that night define me. I didn't stoop to her level. I stood up for myself in the way that mattered, with dignity. One day, I'll meet someone who sees me fully and doesn't play games. But until then, I'm okay being on my own. In fact, I'm more than okay. I'm learning who I am without anyone else's noise clouding my voice. And if there's one thing I've taken from all this, it's that self-respect is non-negotiable. No matter how much you care for someone, you have to care for yourself more. That dinner may have been the end of a relationship, but for me, it was the start of something better. A life that's honest, peaceful, and fully mine. Thank you for watching. Hi everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. My name is George. When my wife tried to divorce me right after I inherited my late mother's fortune, she thought she was being smart. I had no idea that the woman I built my life with would turn on me the moment I was at my most vulnerable. She assumed she'd walk away with half of the inheritance. But she was wrong, and she was about to find out. I met Michelle 9 years ago. We were in our mid-20s, full of dreams, and trying to figure out adulthood one step at a time. Our connection felt natural. The conversations flowed, the chemistry was there, and we both wanted the same things at the time. The first few years together were filled with those small, beautiful moments. I honestly thought I had found someone who would stand beside me no matter what life threw our way. But not everyone shared my excitement. The first time I introduced Michelle to my mom, I could tell she didn't like her that much. My mother wasn't rude or dismissive. In fact, she was as polite as always. But after Michelle left that day, my mom sat me down and said something I've never forgotten. She said, "I know you're in love, George, but time will decide how well this goes." She looked at me like a mother who'd seen enough of the world to spot things her son couldn't. She wasn't accusing Michelle of anything. She made something clear by saying, "I don't hate her, but you're my only child, and I need you to move with your eyes open." That conversation stuck with me, but at the time, I saw it as just a motherly concern. I thought she was being overly protective. I took her advice, in part, and didn't rush into marriage. Michelle and I dated for a few years before tying the knot. And when we finally got married, I thought we were ready. But looking back now, I realized my mother picked up on something that I, in all my infatuation, missed. Even after we got married, the relationship between Michelle and my mom stayed the same, cordial, but cold. There was never any blow-up or argument, just distance. My mother remained polite, but reserved, the kind of reserved that tells you she's watching everything, but won't say more unless she has to. She never tried to interfere in our marriage. She respected my decisions, even if she didn't agree with them. But she never got close to Michelle, either. There were no long chats over tea or bonding moments between them. At the time, I told myself that was normal. Not everyone becomes best friends with their in-laws. I figured as long as they weren't hostile, it was fine. The first few years of our marriage were mostly steady. There were the usual ups and downs, learning to live together, adjusting to each other's habits, figuring out how to build a life side by side. We had our arguments like any couple, sure, but nothing major. I had spent years working a steady job in the corporate world. It was safe, but it wasn't fulfilling. I had this itch to create something for myself, to stop trading hours for someone else's dream. So, 2 years into the marriage, I made the jump. I left my job to start my own agency. It wasn't a reckless move because I had done my homework. I saved up. I built a small team. For a while, things were okay. But then, one of my employees messed up badly on a major project. This was a complete disaster. We lost not one, but our 2 biggest clients. They pulled out immediately, and the agency's lifeline was cut off. Those 2 clients made up more than half of our revenue. And when they left, it felt like someone yanked the floor from beneath my feet. I tried to stay calm and rebuild. I reached out to potential new clients. I updated our pitch deck. I chased every lead I could find. But none of them came close to filling the gap. The agency went into what I can only describe as limp mode. We were still technically running, but without enough income to keep us afloat. Every week, I watched our balance dip lower. Every night, I went to bed knowing the numbers didn't add up anymore. After 2 months of trying to hold it together, the stress started leaking into our home life. The bills didn't pause. The groceries didn't buy themselves. I did my best to keep the house running, but it wasn't enough. And Michelle wasn't having it. The patience I thought she had has vanished. She started getting cold, angry, and bitter. I hoped she would step up just a little while I tried to turn things around. I wasn't asking her to carry the weight forever, just for a while. But instead of supporting me, she turned every day into a fight. Even when she did help with money, she made sure I heard about it. Loudly. She'd complain sometimes for hours about how I had left a perfectly good job to chase a business that was collapsing in real time. And, to be fair, I understood where the frustration was coming from. But what hurt most was how quickly she started pointing fingers, like none of this affected both of us. Like I had somehow dragged her into a mess just to watch her suffer in it. It wasn't just the money that created the cracks. The truth is, things between us had already been shifting. We had hit a rough patch even before all this financial pressure showed up. But once the money issues came in, those cracks widened into gaps we could barely look across. We stopped communicating. The warmth disappeared. We weren't partners anymore, we were roommates. At some point, I realized I was running out of options. I had been trying to keep the business afloat on my own, scraping through every week and hoping for some sort of miracle. I didn't want to ask anyone for help, especially not my mother. I mean, she'd already done so much for me throughout my life. But pride doesn't pay bills. And watching everything I built slowly fall apart, that kind of pressure changes your perspective real quick. So, one evening, I drove over to my mom's house. I told her everything. How the agency was sinking, how I'd lost my top clients, how I had tried to fix it quietly, but I couldn't pull it off alone. I thought maybe she'd be disappointed or give me one of her "you should have known better" talks. But she didn't. She listened, nodded slowly, and after a few seconds of silence, she stood up, walked over to her drawer, pulled out a folder, and said, "Take this. It should cover what you need to get back on your feet." She gave me enough to restructure things, to hire temporary consultants, revamp our proposals, and get our systems running again. It wasn't a magic fix, but it gave me breathing room. And in the next few months, things did get a little better. I brought in a few new clients. They weren't as big as the ones I lost, but they helped stabilize the cash flow. I stopped waking up in cold sweats, thinking the office would shut down next week. I felt like I could finally breathe again. But while the business was healing slowly, the marriage wasn't. That was the hard part. You'd think the financial relief would ease the tension between us. But instead, it just exposed how far we'd drifted from each other. Michelle and I barely talked. When we did, it was surface level. We weren't spending time together, not because of work schedules, but because we stopped making an effort. We'd eat in the same room, but barely make eye contact. We slept in the same bed, but felt like strangers. I'd try sometimes, but it always ended with one-word answers or silence. We both knew something was breaking, but neither of us wanted to say it out loud, so we just lived like that for months. One evening, out of the blue, I got a call from my mother. Her voice was soft. But there was a seriousness in her tone I hadn't heard before. She asked if I could come see her the next day. I knew something wasn't right. The next day, I drove over to her place, thinking maybe she just needed help with something around the house. But when I sat down, the look on her face told me this wasn't about leaky taps or groceries. She told me that she had ovarian cancer, not just recently diagnosed. She had been living with it for nearly a year. It was already late stage. The treatments she'd been doing weren't working the way she hoped. Her doctors told her it was time to stop thinking in terms of years and start thinking in terms of months. That moment shattered me. I sat there completely still, trying to process it, but everything felt like a blur. My mother was my rock. Ever since my father passed away 12 years ago, she had been the one constant in my life. Hearing that I was going to lose her, it was like hearing that the ground beneath me was about to crack wide open. I remember just sitting there, looking at her hands, thinking how many times those hands had held mine when life got rough. And now I was the one being told to prepare to let go. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest I've ever lived through. I tried to keep my agency running, tried to keep my head above water professionally, but my heart wasn't in it. I was either at the hospital, sitting by her side, or mentally stuck in that hospital room, even when I wasn't physically there. Watching someone you love slowly fade away is not something you can describe properly. I would sit there and hold her hand, sometimes in silence, sometimes talking about nothing, because I didn't know how to talk about goodbye. I told Michelle what was going on, and at first, she reacted with sympathy. She said all the right things. But as time went on, I started noticing how little she was actually showing up. She visited the hospital a few times, but not often. When I asked, she'd say work was overwhelming or that she found hospitals depressing. I didn't press her. Truth be told, I'd already accepted that she and my mother never had a close relationship. They were cordial, polite, even, but there was never that real warmth. So I stopped expecting more. I didn't want to fight while I was already drowning emotionally. 2 months. That's how long my mom stayed in the hospital before her body gave up. 2 months of watching the strongest woman I know slowly lose her strength. And when she finally passed, even though I had seen it coming, I still wasn't ready. She had always told me that when her time came, she didn't want fanfare. She didn't want people flying in or making speeches. She wanted to be buried quietly, without delay. So I made sure that's exactly what happened. I buried her the next day, just like she asked. I took care of everything. The funeral home, documents, the service. I remember standing by her grave, listening to the pastor speak, and thinking, how do you keep going when the person who taught you how to survive is no longer here to guide you? That was the beginning of a very dark season in my life. One I thought I'd be facing with my wife by my side. But I would learn soon enough she had a different plan. A week after I buried my mother, I got a call that caught me off guard. It was from her lawyer. He asked if I could come by the office whenever I had a moment. I set the appointment for the next afternoon. Now, walking into that office felt heavy. I hadn't even begun to adjust to the fact that I couldn't just pick up the phone and hear my mother's voice. I expected the meeting to be about paperwork, maybe to sign off on funeral costs or close her accounts. The lawyer pulled out a thick file. He told me that before her health got worse, my mother had restructured her finances. She didn't just leave behind money. She placed everything into a trust. I sat there quietly while he explained what that meant, because truthfully, I had no clue. He broke it down for me in plain language. A trust is like a locked box that holds someone's money or assets, but only certain people can access it, and only under specific conditions. I was the only person listed in the trust. There were no other beneficiaries. Everything she had was all in there for me. But it wasn't money I could just grab the next day. She set it up with clauses that showed just how much thought she put into protecting me, even after she was gone. The most important clause said I couldn't access the full amount until after a 3-year stability period. That meant I had to wait 3 years, during which my life had to remain steady. No big personal disasters, especially no divorce. On top of that, If I ever got divorced during those 3 years, or if I was even in the middle of a divorce, my spouse would be completely cut off from ever touching a kobo of that trust. Not a cent. Not indirectly. Not through the courts. Not even through negotiation. The money was shielded completely from marital property laws. I remember sitting there with the folder in my hands, just staring at it. My first reaction was confusion. I kept wondering why my mother would go to these lengths. Did she not trust Michelle? Did she not trust me? Was this her being too careful, or did she see something in Michelle that I had ignored? But the truth is, my mother had always been private and careful. She never told me how much she was worth, never showed off, never bragged. She just lived quietly, and apparently planned quietly too. I didn't question her choices. Part of me knew deep down that she just wanted to be sure I was protected, no matter what happened. I left the office that day in a fog. I told Michelle that I'd met with the lawyer and that my mom left me an inheritance. I didn't mention the trust. I didn't talk about the waiting period or the clauses. I figured it wasn't the time, and honestly, I didn't think it would matter. When I told her about the inheritance, she barely looked up from her phone. All she said was, "Your mom was so organized." Maybe she didn't know what to say, or was trying to be careful not to seem greedy. But now I know better. Her reaction was calculated. She was already thinking ahead. I just didn't know it yet. 2 weeks after I told my wife, Michelle, that my mom had left me an inheritance, I got served on a regular workday. I was at the office, in the middle of reviewing reports, when a man walked in and asked for me by name. He was a process server. He handed me a sealed envelope and said, "You've been served." When I opened the envelope, I felt like the floor dropped beneath me. It was a notice of petition for dissolution of marriage. In plain terms, Michelle was filing for divorce. The stated reason was irreconcilable differences. I just sat there for a minute, stunned. Sure, we hadn't been perfect lately. Our communication had dropped, and things between us weren't like they used to be, but we hadn't even argued recently. There were no warning signs, no "we need to talk" conversation. Just that letter. When I got home that evening, I walked straight to her and asked, "Why? Why are you divorcing me, without even trying to talk to me first?" She didn't flinch. She didn't even look at me properly. She just said, "We've grown apart. Let's be adults about it." Then she walked away like she had already made peace with whatever she had planned. I didn't even know how to react. I stood there, feeling like I was speaking to a stranger. From there, the divorce process started to drag on for months. It was slow, it was draining, and it felt like being stuck in a storm that wouldn't end. During mediation, Michelle came in swinging. Her lawyer confidently demanded 50%, half, of all present and future marital assets. The key words there, future assets. She assumed that included the inheritance from my mom. I hadn't told her the fine details of how it worked because, frankly, I didn't think I needed to. I never even touched the money yet. Everything was still locked away in a trust, just as my mother had arranged before she passed. What Michelle didn't know, and what her lawyer apparently didn't bother to verify, was that my mom had put very strict conditions around the inheritance. And if I were in the middle of a divorce during that period, my spouse was completely cut out. During one of the mediation sessions, the trust's legal structure finally came up. My lawyer brought in the documentation and explained it. He laid it all out, how the inheritance wasn't part of the marital estate, how it had never been deposited into our shared accounts, and how it was legally protected by those clauses. I'll never forget the look on Michelle's face when it hit her. She looked like someone had pulled the rug right from under her feet. Her lawyer glanced through the document, flipped back and forth, and finally leaned back in his chair and muttered, "We should reconsider our position." You could tell he was stunned, too. He thought they had a solid claim, but they had no leg to stand on. She had made her move way too early, and with the wrong assumptions. Her plan, if you can even call it that, backfired right in her face. In the end, the divorce went through. But without any access to the inheritance, Michelle only got what was available from our actual shared marital assets. And trust me, there wasn't much left by then. The settlement she received didn't even come close to what she thought she was walking away with. In fact, most of it was swallowed by her legal fees. But still, she wasn't happy. After the settlement, she lashed out. Called me selfish. Said I was evil. Said I planned everything with my mom to screw her over. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't hold back. I told her straight. When I first sat with the lawyer and heard all the clauses in the trust, I thought my mom went too far. I really did. But after seeing what you pulled off here, I get it now. She knew exactly what you were capable of. She saw something in you I refused to see, and she protected me from it. That was the last real conversation we had. The divorce was finalized about a year after it all began. She went her way. I went mine. But it didn't end there. Some months after the divorce was finalized, Michelle reached out to me again. It came as a message late one evening. Just a direct confession. She was drowning in debt, and now it was all crashing down on her at once. She said she didn't know who else to turn to. She said she felt stuck. And for a moment, just a moment, I felt that old instinct tug at me. The part of me that once would have moved mountains to help her. But I didn't. I took a deep breath and replied, I'm sorry you're going through this, Michelle. But I can't save you. I truly wish you well. I just left it at that. Because here's the truth. When someone shows you who they are, especially at your lowest, you believe them. And when they try to cash in on your grief, you don't go back and hand them another chance to do it again. That was the last time we ever spoke. Looking back, I feel grateful for the warning signs, for the heartbreak that opened my eyes, and even for the silence that came after. I won't lie and say it didn't hurt. It did. I lost my mother and my marriage in the same season of life. That kind of pain changes a person. But it also wakes you up. Thanks for listening.